only called on their idols in hardship, and the idol worshippers of today, read Muslims, do so when they're in ease. And they are greater mushrikeen than those from before. And if you will look, the printer that is responsible, the able-bodied translator, the servant of Qur'an and Sunnah, Abdul Malik Mujahid, the translator of this is the same translator of this, Kitab al-Tawheed, in Arabiya, into English. No difference. It's the same. And within these pages, within the chapter references, you can see the same statement. I'm just looking at this. You can see the same statements quoted over and over and over again. And he as well, like Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who went on a 51-year jihad against mushrikeen, although he never left Arabiya, so who's he fighting from the mushrikeen? He goes on an over 50-year quest, dies at the Battle of Balakut, trying to kill Muslims and then also to kill Sikhs. Dies being killed by them in the Battle of Balakut. So you have to ask yourself, why is there such a seeming coincidence and connection between this book, Taqwiyatul Iman, and this book, Kitab al-Tawheed? It's not a coincidence. This is merely a translation of Kitab al-Tawheed. It is a reconfiguration. Remember, Shah Muhammad Ismail goes on Hajj, comes back with that theology. Then others go and make Hajj, they come back with books written in Arabic, and he pins this. This was Imam Ahmad Rida Khan's Exhibit A when he moved against some of the leaders of Deobandi, which is coming later. So this was Exhibit A. Now, we have to mention some of the people who died along this, at this time, or around this time. The second reviver of the Khawarij in his era, or in that area, Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, he died in 1206 AH. He was buried and left in an unmarked grave by his sons and grandsons and a few family friends. These were his only students. I say this because what type of movement is it where your only followers are your children and a small handful of family friends? You're buried in an unmarked grave that to this day no one knows where it is, but we know where the grave of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is. And as we've said before, like Imam Sulaiman ibn Suhaym said, this man, referring to Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, only calls to the Tawheed of himself and is similar to false prophets and disciples of false prophets like Musaylimah the liar. So this is the wrong Muhammad. And fortunately, we don't know where he's buried, so we know where the right Muhammad ﷺ is buried, so we visit him and send salat and salam upon him. Also, Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Gharib died in 1208 AH after prolonged torture. Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Gharib was an alim, one of the great Sunni scholars. He lived in the aftermath of the extermination programs against the intelligentsia of Muslim Orthodoxy when Salaffiyah overran districts like Huraymila and Uyayna and Washam and Arid. A Muwahidun cultist came to him one day under the cover of a sincere student to ask him some questions about some matters that were of concern to him. You see how these things are couched in this pious falsehood? And so when he asked him, what do you say about this man, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and his organization? And he said, you know very well what I have said in the past. Yes, but that was written. I'm asking you for a statement. And so the Sheikh gave a statement, and he was promptly arrested by the police of this organization and tortured to death. So he is one of the martyrs to Al-Muwahidun. Another martyr was Imam Sulaiman ibn Abdul Wahhab, who died in the year 1209 AH, being tortured to death. He was picked up off the battlefield in 1190 AH, trying to stop the rise of Salaffiyah in his area in Sudair. He'd already written 2 books against Salaffiyah. The first one was as-Sawa'iq al-Ilahiyya, the divine lightning. The second was Fasl al-Khitab as-Sawa'iq al-Ilahiyya, which was a longer one, which is this one here. This edition is the longer edition, which has been translated. This is the longer edition, which goes into far more depth. And he wrote this the year of his capture. He wrote it the year of his capture. It has over 644 fiqh, hadith, and scholarly references. Over 644. And over 190 citations of different scholars. So when he was taken in 1190 AH, there had been numerous assassination attempts on his life. The most famous of when he was sitting in the masjid, and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, in an attempt to try to have his older brother murdered, took a demoniac who, whenever he saw anyone, would attack that person. And so he put a sword in the demoniac's hand and he sent him to the masjid. I want you to think about this carefully, because this is the mind of the organization that we're dealing with today. You're in a place of Allah, worshiping Allah, and someone sends an assassin to kill you in your masjid. So he's there, and the demoniac comes in, sees him, and the demon that he has leaves him and he drops his sword. Sheikh Suleiman is still afraid, but the man says, "Do not worry. You are one of those who are safe. You are one of those saints of this era." And he leaves him. So identifies him as the Qutb, one of the Abdal of his era, identifies him and then leaves him. Sheikh Suleiman ibn Abdul Wahhab is captured in 1190 AH, tortured to death in a Dir'iyah, and dies in 1209 AH, a whole 3 years outliving his brother. I cannot tell you how important it is for us to deal with history. Sheikh Suleiman ibn Abdul Wahhab was really the first one to write about the movement, to catalog the atrocities, and to deal with every single theological point that they mentioned. In his book, Fasl al-Khitab, he deals with some 17 aspects of the creed and theology of al-Muwahhidun. 17. He deals with their entire theology. Someone that reads that book, at the end of it, if they are someone that's read it really with a fine-tooth comb, will say, is there anything that they believed at all that was correct? Someone that finishes that book and reads it will say to themselves, are we even referring to people who are Muslim? It is that severe in its critique. Another alim who died, Abu Bakr ibn Muhammad al-Mulat, who died in 1220 AH, one of the great and one of the few Hanafi scholars in Arabiya, because the Hanafi method had not made a very big footprint in Arabiya. But he was one of the great Hanafi scholars. Maturidi, his creed, very strong. Abdullah ibn Dawood al-Basri, who dies in 1225 AH, one of the great scholars of Iraq from Az-Zubayr region. He wrote a book, a thick book, perhaps thicker than Fasl al-Khitab, against al-Muwahhidun, Muhammad Abdul Wahhab and his group. He wrote a thick passage, and like all the other scholars of that time period, identified him as a false prophet and that they were disciples of Musaylimah. And he used to refer to Muhammad Abdul Wahhab's organization as a religion. The people that have entered into your religion. The people that have followed your religion. And they continue to define it as another religion. And that's significant because you're dealing with ulama. Another is Nasr ibn Sulaiman ibn Suhaym al-Zubayri. He died in 1226 AH. There were 3 assassination attempts on his life. I forgot to mention this. There were 3 assassination attempts on Nasr ibn Sulaiman ibn Suhaym al-Zubayri, 2 on Abdullah ibn Dawood al-Basri, in which they tried to drive the sword through him and it wouldn't go through. So there were 2 assassination attempts on his life, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delivered Sheikh al-Basri. And then there were 3 on Nasr ibn Sulaiman ibn Suhaym al-Zubayri, and they failed to kill him. Another was Mustafa ibn Sa'ad al-Ruhaybani in 1240 AH. He was one of the great scholars of Ruhayban in Sham. You have Muhammad Ali Basha, who dies in 1266 AH. Abd al-Aziz ibn Hamid, who dies in 1231 AH. He was captured and tortured continuously by al-Muwahidun. And they then said to him, now you're one of our qadis. We hear that Muhammad Ali Basha and his army are going to invade. Convince them of otherwise. Abdul Aziz ibn Hamid goes to the front, and in speaking with Muhammad Ali Basha and his courtesans, he starts a conversation out of nowhere on theology and begins to explain the proper Muslim theology. And when in wonder they look at him, he says, I have come to you under the cover of darkness, which is really concealing my light. Annihilate them and leave nothing standing. Destroy all in your path. And so they take him over to their side of the camp, dress him and clothe him in elegant clothing and look after him and destroy and devastate everything in a Dariyah and all of those places. They devastated that area. Another example, Ibn Jadid al-Najdi. He dies in 1232 AH, 3 assassination attempts. Another is Imam Ahmad al-Sawi in 1241 AH, 2 assassination attempts, both of which failed. Another is Ahmad al-Dayaf in 1250 AH, in which takfir was made upon him, but no assassination attempt. Muhammad ibn Abidin in 1252 AH, the great source of fatwa for Hanafi scholars. He was and is the dominant voice that is used in Hanafi fiqh for quoting the mu'tamid of the madhab. His book, Radd al-Mukhtar, I just had the opportunity to look at it at the house of a dear brother of mine, and just on the issue of tashahhud, of the finger being raised in tashahhud, whether it is lowered or left for the duration of the entire salah, there are 20 sets of books on each side. So you've got 20 sets of books that say yes, and then on the other side, there are 20 sets of books that says no, and then he reconciles them. So he reconciles between Sham, between Egypt, between Samarkand, between all of this. He reconciles all of it, and then gives you the readout and says, now, this is the fatwa. This is the fatwa. If only that was in English. If only that was in English. Because you've seen, like I have seen, you ask 3 Hanafis in a room on a mas'ala and you get 5 answers. That shouldn't happen. Because people are confused, they don't know what's what, they don't know what to say, they don't know where to go, they don't know who to go to, because whenever they sit with someone, they try to brainwash them. And then they leave them. I just want to learn fiqh. I don't want to be taught my creed over again and have to take shahada again. I just want to learn my fiqh. No, you have to study this, you have to study that. They cannot satisfactorily sit down without being exposed to the disease that is biting into the heart of this community and others, unless they study with Turks, Turkomans, Uzbeks, but that will involve them leaving this hemisphere. It's that serious. If only someone, and I say this just to anyone that may hear this sincere entreaty and grant this dua for the sake of Allah, if only someone, some panel of 5 sincere people from amongst the Ahnaf would only translate this book, put it into English with over 4,000 footnotes, with an annotated spine,